This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the lip was twisted, the soldier was blanched, and the men were dancing, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about whatever happened to Inspector Gregson? Or Mrs. Hudson's husband? Or of Holmes's early clients?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 379, The Manor House Case. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you housed and ready to go?
Yes, I'm completely housed and hosed. In fact, I'm still dripping into the carpet.
Must be from eye hose, I would imagine.
Yes, we're always dripping from eye hose.
Yes. Well, we have an interesting episode today. This came from a... I don't remember who gave this recommendation. Maybe it was me.
I think it was you. And we'll have to send you something from the warehouse.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, I'll get a price. Yeah, and just a reminder, if you make a recommendation of a topic for us to cover on a future Trifles episode, and we choose your topic, we will send you, what do we send people? A BSJ back issue? Something from, I think it's a BSJ back issue from... Or just a Trifles Vault item. We will send you some token of our appreciation for you helping out and inspiring the show. And of course, you can also help out and inspire the show by supporting us on Patreon or on Substack for as little as $1 a month. Your financial support helps us pay for the hosting costs, email, research, etc., things that go into producing a podcast. If you find it within your heart to support us, we appreciate it. And just a reminder, at the end of every month, that final episode of the month, we have a drawing for a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal. Everyone who financially supports the show at any level is automatically entered into that drawing. So we would appreciate your support, and we will show our appreciation forthwith. Well, as I said, good recommendation this month from me, this week from me. We were curious about some of the names that we've come across in the canon of the houses that Holmes and Watson visit or where their clients reside in the countryside. You'll recall, you probably have a favorite canonical house in your mind. There are quite a few of them that stand out. We're going to get into those, but we're also going to get into some of the more esoteric ones, some of the ones that are perhaps just mentioned in passing. And the idea for the name of this episode, of course, comes from the Greek interpreter. When Watson meets Mycroft for the first time, Mycroft, of course, says, "I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler." Thank you, Mycroft. That's a great plug for our other podcast. He says, "By the way, Sherlock, I expected to see you round last week to consult me over that Manor House case. I thought you might be a little out of your depth." And spoiler alert, Holmes says, "Nope, I solved it." And of course, it was Adams who did it. But after the name inspiration for the episode, we thought, well, why don't we actually get into some of the history behind why people name their houses or have named their houses, particularly in England, and kind of work our way temporally up to the era of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, sounds good.
So let's see. We have a few resources. We'll have links for you in the show notes, but I think the first thing to understand is that there's a reason that they have different names, and this information comes to us from Artichoke, Artichoke Limited, which is a
Every time I want to find out something important, I usually ask an artichoke.
So Artichoke Limited has a wonderful guide to English country house names explained. And they remind us that this is something that's been happening over the course of centuries. And the names have evolved as the houses have as well. But they look particularly at suffixes of houses. What's a house suffix? What do they mean by a suffix?
Well, Suffolk is right next door to Sussex,
I
which
knew
is
it.
south of
I knew
Hampshire.
that's where this was going.
Well, you
The
asked.
Suffolk vampire. That's,
Look, I'm consulting my artichoke and leafing through the answers that come back. So.
Boy. I would get stuffed, Bert.
Yeah.
No, they're talking about when you have the name of a house and then a second name after. So the Abbey Grange, for example. Mm-hmm. Grange is a suffix.
Well, see now, that certainly is true, but they do make an interesting point on this particular website.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Grange, they make a couple of interesting points. One is that this goes back to when land was divided up because of the monarchy taking over various properties that at one point belonged to the church. And so a house named Grange was, because of the word Grange, basically an agricultural spot, but there was often, according to the website, a much larger house, often an abbey or a priory nearby. And so now that we have that information, I realize that there is an element of significant redundancy around Abbey Grange. Although I guess it's also, a matter of specificity. It's not just the Abbey House. This is the Abbey Grange.
Well, that's right. And you would think that the friars, the abbots, etc., would have needed a place to store their grain. So,
Yeah.
The confluence of the two. But of course, this is in an English aristocracy. And when we're talking about feudalism, the lord of the manor, so to speak, the lord or his family would have a seat, a house that was part of their extensive land holdings, and of course they would act as a landlord for everyone who lived on their land, and the main house would be where they set up, and they were typically built not too far away from a village, right? Because they had people who worked at the house. They had to have administrators of the estate, etc. So it would make sense to have it associated with a particular village or town.
Yeah, well, that makes a good deal of sense. The interesting thing, though, about the names of houses that appear in the cases of Sherlock Holmes is that there's a good group of them that defy this sort of easy explanation about such and such hall, such and such house, Abbey Grange, and so on. For example, one of my favorite house names in the canon is Beauchamp Ariance, from the Devil's Foot. It's just a lovely name. And Beauchamp, now you can look at that and say, okay, well, that must be from the French. And Beauchamp means, I guess, beautiful field, Beauchamp. But Ariance is a word I just don't recognize. And so, but it's a lovely word, beautiful field, whatever Ariance means, I'm just too ignorant to understand.
It's a commune in France.
Ariance is a commune?
Yes, it is.
Really?
Yes.
Is that what the word means, commune?
I don't know if that's what it means, but there is a...
it's a proper name.
It is a, capitalized commune in the Moselle department in Grand Est of northeastern France.
Oh, wow, you can get some nice wine in the
I'm sure.
arrondissement. Well, that is interesting. And other great names are like Deep Dean House. I just love that. Deep Dean House in Norwood Builder. And I've got I know that it's in Surrey. It's a sort of a suburb of a town in Surrey, Deep Dean. But the etymology of that is beyond me.
Well, of course, that's the head of the school, right? Deep Dean?
No, that was Jerry's
No, it's
partner.
a dean is a valley. So it'd be
really?
Deep Valley.
D-E-N-E?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very good.
So
but then there are some names that just defy any kind of analysis. For example, King's Pyland. What is Pyland?
I think that might be, well, I don't know exactly. I initially thought it might be a geographical description, like Dean is a valley. And so many of these places are named after, some geographical feature or some architectural feature. So I always thought King's Pyland was like literally a pile of land. Could have been a combination of the two words.
Some description. Well, it could go back to Old English too.
Yeah.
And I've never looked into it, but I've always presumed that Tridanic Wartha, which is also in the Devil's Foot, along with Beauchamp Ariance, that the root of that name must be the old Cornish, since they're out in Cornwall. But I never bothered to look at it. But can you? Now the interesting thing, of course, is how the postman kept track of this. Now I guess the post office, these names would be once assigned in place forever. It's not like someone is going to come into your leasehold and suddenly decide that Beauchamp Ariance isn't quite a nice name. I'm going to call it, Wolder Manor.
Right.
So once assigned, I guess you wouldn't need a number. This is Scott Monty at Beauchamp Ariance, Cornwall.
Well, similarly to that, Charles Augustus Milverton lived at Appledore Towers. And I remember when I first discovered a Sherlockian society in Boston, and I wrote to them. I was living in a residence hall at Boston University called Warren Towers. And I decided, and it was Warren Towers, 700 Commonwealth Avenue. Right, so it wasn't just the name of the establishment; it was actually a street number there as well. But I, in my return address to the poker of the speckled band, I listed my address as Appledore Towers, 700 Commonwealth Avenue, and that's the way he wrote to me, and it still made it. So fortunately, the U.S. Postal Service at the time was a little smarter than they had to be.
Good. Interesting.
Yeah. But along those lines, kind of staying out in the country, one of the other fun names that I enjoyed was Cheesemans. Cheesemans Lamberley from the Sussex Vampire. And, of course, Watson made the observation about the old oaken beams and the date being carved over the lintel. You definitely got a sense that this was a place that had been around for quite some time. What other favorites do you have?
Well, Albemarle Mansion in Wisteria Lodge. That always puts me in mind of Poirot's address in the David Suchet series, or maybe in Christie's books, Whitehaven Mansions, which is, of course, a block of flats. It's not really
right.
an individual house. But let's see, Beauchamp-Barriance, Deepdene House, King's Pyland. Well, there's Merripit House in the Hound, and that must have something to do with the family name of the Merripits who built it.
I would imagine, because there are a couple of other house names in, well, of course, Baskerville Hall, we know that one. A couple of other names in the Hound of the Baskervilles that are geographical in nature. We have High Tor and Foulmire. How'd you like to live at Foulmire?
Foulmire.
Come on over for dinner and tea at Foulmire. We'll sit outside and enjoy the natural smells.
Come over to Foulmire House, but please use the rug in front of the main door to clean your shoes before you come inside. Well, Woodman's Lee from Black Peter.
Another good one.
And I think these are just very creative and fascinating and carry their own sort of mystery with them. Tuxbury Old Park and the Blanched Soldier.
What do you make of the Myrtles?
Really lovely. Oh, the Myrtles is a great name. Years ago, I had a friend who's now passed away, sadly, in Cornwall, and his house was named Gentle Knight, but he spelled gentle Gentil. And that was the name of the house, I think, when he and his wife bought it. Gentle Knight. Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T.
Yeah, I like that.
And I loved sending him letters addressed to Gentle Knight, Crackington. And the town was Crackington Haven.
Oh, lovely. Well, as we think about some of the stories themselves that are named after some of these old houses, we mentioned the Abbey Grange already. But, of course, there is also Shoscombe Old Place.
Right.
That's, just one of those, again, one of those suffixes where you live at a place. You mentioned park there, with Tuxbury Old Park. That's typically that came from a plot of land. Maybe it served as a deer park. It was owned by royalty or, of course, that feudal landlord. But it was usually a wide open place. So we have Shoscombe Old Place and Abbey Grange. And what's another story that...
Well, Copper Beeches.
Oh, the Copper Beeches, yeah. Which, again, named for, the surroundings. The Three Gables, right? That's another one. It's an architectural reference there.
Always wondered about that. I mean, could it have been such a rarity having three gables on your house? Well, maybe.
It does seem rather
Wouldn't
odd.
it be funny if there was another house at the other end of town that also had three gables,
Yeah.
and these people
What are they
were
gonna
forever
do?
exchanging their mail?
The three Eves. I guess they would have had to do that.
Right. Three faces of Eve, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, here's a good question. Thor Bridge. I know that was the actual bridge where the mystery took place, but I don't recall if there was a name of the house associated with Thor Bridge, or if it was simply, if the house itself was called Thor Bridge.
But the river, there was a river there too.
Yeah.
And I think the river featured in the naming somehow.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Well, actually, the house was Thorbridge, wasn't it?
That's what I'm saying. I think it might have been.
Yeah. Interesting.
Oh, how about the Haven?
The Haven Horror. Yeah, the Haven.
Haven. That
Some
was,
Haven.
that was retired colorman. And he had hoped it was a haven from the rest of society, I think. Yeah. Oh, Wisteria Lodge. How could we forget about Wisteria Lodge?
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And of course, Hurlston and Burlston.
Right.
From Musgrave Ritual in the Valley of Fear. There's got to be a poem in there somewhere where you can put all these names together and, you've got Shoscombe Old Place, Yoxley Old Place, Tewksbury Old Hall.
Right.
We could probably create something very sing-songy out of this.
Yeah.
High Lodge, High Tor. Oh.
Yeah.
Holderness Hall. There's Fortin Old Hall, Holderness Hall. Some of the Baskerville Hall we mentioned before. So we've got granges and halls and lodges and places and houses and towers.
Well, they're all wonderful places where people gather and get up to the strangest things, which just means more work for Sherlock Holmes.
And one mystery I think we should unravel here. We talked about this just before we were recording. There seems to be a discrepancy in the name of Hilton Cubit's place in The Dancing Men. In some cases, we see it referred to as Ridlingthorpe Manor, and in other cases, we see it named Ridingthorpe Manor.
Right.
What's the deal there?
Well, I think there you have the deal of a publisher when putting out an American edition who thought that the idea of riddling as the word of a place would just baffle these tiny American minds.
Now, looking quickly on here, it says if you open your Bartholomew survey map of Norfolk and study the neighborhood of North Walsham, according to Christopher Morley, you'll see that it was only a short drive from there to the house of Hilton Cubit. He lived at either Eddingthorpe or at Ridlington, which accounts for the confusion of the texts.
Oh, well, I'm glad there's an answer.
One thing to note, we have a trifle more information for you regarding stately houses or stately homes, HOLMES that is, as a bonus episode just for our Patreon and Substack supporters. So if you'd like to hear a little bit of the analysis continue, just make sure you are supporting us at any level on Patreon or on Substack at trifles.substack.com and patreon.com/trifles.
But like a lot of this, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Grey archways, mullioned windows, and all the venerable wreckage of a feudal keep.
Surely the house interests you.
The house is freezing, Watson.